Hello again, and welcome back to another episode of Adding Game Sounds, where today we're going to be working off what we did in the last episode, and we're going to be adding some splash sounds to anything that can fall into the acid into our game levels. Before we start, just want to quickly let you guys know that the scripts that I've been posting on my website for all these sort of FMOD videos and Unity videos that was currently temporarily down is now back up again on the new site as we're continuing to build it. So if we, let's quickly go back. If we go to scottgamesounds.com, you should find a simple little page like this. Just go to C# scripts, find them here, and then all the sort of FMOD and Unity tutorials will appear here. And you can just click on the script that I used in the video to find out what it looked like. Then once you do, you can also just copy and paste it into your scenes, your own games, and edit them however you like. So apologies it's taken so long to get these up. I also need to do a bit more updating with this so we can get the new videos up, so the ones we're doing with this game here. But hopefully that won't take too long, keep an eye on it. And yeah, I'll have the link to my website for all those scripts in the description if you want to access that. Also, I hope you all enjoyed the holidays. It's just been Christmas and New Year's is, well, tomorrow. New Year's Eve is tomorrow. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed your time off and are ready to get back into some audio programming, fun, messing around kind of stuff like I am. Also, I just wanted to quickly thank everyone who's still taking part in the survey that I set up a few episodes ago. That's still available. You know, there's a survey I created a while ago that allows you to basically critique, I suppose, these videos and give me some suggestions as to what you'd like to see from me. And as always, I'll have a link in the description for you to access that. But yeah, I'm still getting people fill it out and, you know, sending me little messages, which is great. I'm learning a lot and hopefully I can make these videos, you know, a lot better for you guys. So, you know, if you have any ideas, feel free to fill that survey out. It takes less than a minute and, you know, you can add as much or as little detail as you want to it. Yeah, so enough of that. Let's jump straight into what we're doing today. Okay, so in the last episode, we were messing around with some kind of air whooshy noises with our player character here. So whenever she jumped from a height, we get that sound. Oh, I spoke over it. Let me do it again. There we go. We get that sound. And whenever she landed in the acid, we told the sound to stop, essentially. And that was just using an OnTriggerEnter function, so it's nice and easy to do. So going off of that function we used last time, what we can now do is anything that lands in the acid, we can play a splash sound. So if I push this box into the acid here, we get a big splash. And also, if Ellen lands in the acid, we get a splash, but we also get kind of a filter effect. So it sounds like we as the player are underwater. So both of those things are what we're going to be looking at in this video. And we're going to start by looking at the new event we've created for playing the splash sound back. Right, so here we are in FMOD, and this is the acid splash event I'm using to play back some sort of acidic-y, splashy, watery sound. As you can see, I've got two audio files here. One's called Acid Pool Splash 2, that sounds like this. And the other is called Acid Pool Jump, which sounds like this. So we've got quite a nice mix of water and acid there. We've got the kind of high-end hiss from the acid splash, and we've got the kind of, not low, but kind of mid, what's the word to describe it? The watery kind of frequencies, if there is a frequency for water, that we get from this file here, the Acid Pool Jump sound. So it's quite a nice blend of the two. With the two files, I've added some modulation to the volume and the pitch, which is pretty standard for most of these sound effects. I just like doing that so it doesn't sound the same every time. I did that for both of them. The main point of interest with this, the thing I had to kind of tweak it the most, was the Spatializer. So this is obviously a 3D event. We want this to have some sort of location, and we want it to, you know, drop off and fade back in and out depending on how close we are to the splash. So for the box, for example, if we push the box in the acid and run away, we want the sound of it to get quieter and quieter. So that took a bit of tweaking with the distance attenuation. As you can see, I've set it to a minimum value of 1 and a maximum value of 100. So if we're between 0 and 1, we'll hear this event at full volume. However, if we are further away than 100, we will not hear the event at all. And I'll explain a little bit later why this was quite important, and this took a bit of time to get this kind of right. But yeah, just to note, that took some editing. The other thing I did was mess around with the envelope settings here. So usually when you load up a Spatializer, it's set to auto. But I changed it to user because I wanted to change the sound size for our event. Now, what the sound size is basically, imagine it like a circle or a sphere around our point that's playing, or point in space that's playing our sound. So in this case, if I quickly zoom in, so imagine a little point in the middle of this box that's playing the sound. The sound size is basically a circle that goes around it, okay? Now, when our player is within that circle, the sound will sound like, well, it will sound like we're on top of the sound, we're inside the sound, and there won't be any panning effect added to it. And we can test that with the 3D panner preview thing over here. So if with this arrow being the sound event and us being the listener in the center of this circle, if I put the arrow in the center and play the event, it sounds like we're on top of the sound. However, if I move the sound to the right of our listener, or us as the player, and play it, it sounds like it's to the right, okay? And that's because there's panning being done there to give us a sense of direction. However, if I increase the sound size, you should notice this little grey circle around our sound source increase. And if I increase it so that the circle now envelops us as a listener, and play it again, even though the sound source is to the right of us, it sounds like it's on top of us, because basically this whole circle here is now the sound source, if that makes sense. So in the case of our game, whenever the player is within inside this circle, we will hear the splash sound as if we were on top of it, and then when we leave, it will start to pan left or right, depending on which direction. And that's because obviously a splash is quite a big sound, you know, it's not like the click of a fingers where it's quite a small sound source. We expect it to be, if we're close to it, we expect it to sound like it's coming from all over. So that took a little bit of editing and just tweaking just to get right. Right, so I'm going to set the sound size back to 10, which is what I found was the best sort of setting for it. Quickly just save and build the banks that I've stored this inside of. And quickly jump over to our scripts. We're going to go back to the water area script, which, just in case you haven't seen the last episode, is attached to all of our acid prefabs. Located here, so we're just going to jump back into there, and we're going to look at the OnTriggerEnter function again, and this is how we're going to trigger our splash sound. Okay, so we are playing the acid splash sound with this little line of code here. As you can see, we're using a OneShot, so just a nice easy way to play a 3D event and stop it once it's finished playing. But if you'll notice here, I've added it within an if command, an if statement. And inside the if statement, I've added the time since load level command, or class, I suppose, times a class, that basically is checking to see how long our scene has been playing for in seconds. The idea is I want to only play this one shot if both something obviously enters the trigger box and the scene has been playing for a certain amount of time. The reason why is, if I go back into Unity, I think I explained this in the last episode, can't quite remember, but let's quickly find an example. Let's find some acid. No, okay. Oh, do you know what? It's probably the walls and stuff. Okay, so whenever we load into a new scene that has these acid pools in, the kind of boundaries of the walls around them, I don't know if I can click on them, there we go, are just about entering the trigger box. So if we were to say, let's play our splash sound whenever something enters the trigger box, as soon as we'd load the level up, we'd get a splash sound, even if we were just standing here, because obviously, like I said, these walls are technically touching the trigger box, and therefore would trigger a splash sound. Now, obviously, we don't want that to happen straight away, so that's why the time since load level command is really handy. We could say that we only want to play this one shot if the scene has been loaded for more than 0.5 seconds, and you can tweak this, you know, depending on how long you want to keep it for. But yeah, this is a really helpful command for making sure we only play the one shot, or rather the one shot doesn't play straight away. This was actually suggested to me by Ben, again, Ben Kirsten. Thank you very much for that. Let's quickly go to his comment. So what he did, he actually used it for the bullet. So I think, oh, here we go, probably in part 4, we were using the bullet from the gun, but the problem we had was that we would play the sort of blast sound as soon as we loaded the level, because the instance or the prefab was basically enabled and ready to go, and we put our one shot inside the onEnable function. So as soon as the scene loaded, the onEnable function was triggered, and so was our sound, our blast, which didn't make any sense. So that's what he used this for. He said if the scene has been loaded, only play the blast sound if the scene has been loaded for more than a second. So that's basically what I'm doing here. It's a nice easy way to kind of dodge that little issue. Yeah, and that's basically it for the splash sound itself. Nice and easy, just a one shot, plays a sound, and stops it whenever the sound is done. And it's also quite nice because whenever something enters this trigger box, it will just create a new instance of that event. So we can have loads of different. Say we had loads of boxes fall in the acid, or we had, you know, the player land at the same in the acid at the same time as a box. We can have an instance for each of those, so we can play, you know, multiple different sounds at once. Now, I did have one issue, which with using the OnTriggerEnter function to play this splash sound. Obviously, we know from the last episode that the OnTriggerEnter 2D function was checking to see if a 2D collider had entered the box, and if it did, then it would, you know, do whatever. In our case, we wanted to use that collider to check what game object was entering the acid, and if it was Ellen, then we'd do stuff specific for Ellen, which again I'm going to talk about a bit more later on. However, with the boxes, there was a little bit of a problem. If I go onto one of the boxes, let's click this one here, if I can get it, there we go, zoom in. You'll notice in its Inspector tab that they've actually added 3 different box colliders. They've added one, in fact, let's take them all off and I'll add them all back on just to show you what they do. So they've got one at the bottom here, this is the main one, and this just kind of acts as the box itself, okay? They've got a second one that sits on the right side of the box, and this is a trigger box. As you can see, they've got the is trigger box ticked here. And they've got the same on the left side, if I tick this one back on this. So they've got 2 trigger boxes on the left and the right side. And the idea is that whenever our player enters one of these trigger boxes, it will then say, okay, the player is now touching one of the sides of the box, therefore the player is now allowed to push it, right? Makes sense. However, whenever this box then entered the acid, the trigger box that basically is the acid would notice that 3 box colliders, oh, there we go. 3 box colliders are entering the acid all at once. Therefore, the OnTrigger function would play 3 times, and by extension, our OneShot would play 3 times as well. Obviously, that is not ideal. We don't want to play the sound 3 times. That's going to sound messy and horrible and really mess with the mix of our game. So, tried coming up with a few solutions. Code-wise, is a really annoying way to kind of dodge. Because, like I said, they're not happening on different frames, they're all happening on the same frame. So no matter what we did inside this OnTriggerEnter function, it was always going to be called 3 times in the same frame. So there wasn't much we could do here. However, FMOD, thankfully, came to the rescue. If we go back to our event, I've talked about this before, but we have, on every event, we have a cooldown option. And the cooldown option is basically a set amount of time before this event plays again. So I've set the event cooldown to 20 milliseconds. So whenever this event is now played, the FMOD basically won't play it again until this cooldown time has been met. So it will play the splash event, then wait 20 milliseconds, and then if we, you know, play another OneShot, it will play it again. So going back to our game where 3 box colliders are entering our trigger box at once, even though this OnTriggerEnter function is going to happen 3 times, and therefore this OneShot is going to happen 3 times, we'll only hear one event play because the first one will play, and then FMOD will say, okay, you've played one, however, it's not been 20 milliseconds yet, so I'm not going to play the event again. So that was, thankfully, a nice, easy way to fix it. And obviously, we don't want a massive cooldown because, like I said earlier, we kind of want to be able to, we want to use OneShots, and we want to be able to create multiple instances whenever anything enters the trigger box. We don't want to create one instance within the script like we normally do at the top and in the start function, or which I've actually did try doing, and as you can see, it didn't work. We don't want to do that because then, say, if a box entered the acid, it would play, and then say if the player entered the acid, because we've only created one instance for each pool acid prefab, I guess, we'd only get, what it would do was play the splash sound once, and then stop it and play it again for the player entering the acid, which is not what we want. We want to create separate instances for each object that enters it. So yeah, luckily that was a nice, easy workaround that, you know, solved that problem. I was tearing my hair out for ages trying to fix that one. But yeah, that's just something to bear in mind if you're implementing this yourself. Another thing to be aware of when messing around with the splash sounds for these boxes is that inside this level particularly, I think this is scene or level 4, there's actually quote-unquote cutscenes. And the cutscenes in this are basically controlled by trigger boxes that when triggered will trigger a cutscene. And the cutscene is basically a path that the camera will follow. The camera will move along this path, it will show the player points of interest, then return to the player, all the while pausing the player and disabling all the controls, so whoever's playing it can't run around while this cutscene's going on. But it will just show them points of interest and then return them to the player where they can continue playing the game. If I click on cutscene 1 trigger here, double click on it, you can see this is the trigger box here that will set off the first cutscene. The idea is that our player here will push the box down this hole into the trigger cutscene, and then the cutscene will play. We can also come over to this trigger box here, and we can look at the playable director component, which is what's kind of controlling the cutscene or triggering it. We can also then double click on this section here, the playable section, and it will open up a tab called Timeline. And it's here we can kind of edit the cutscene if we wish to, and also preview it ourselves. So if I drag the cursor along, you can see the camera will move along to this little light switch here. And when this is triggered, this will work. When the box interacts with it, it will glow, and it will, I think the idea of it is, if I quickly go back to the scene, a bridge, which is kind of hidden in here, will come across this hole so our player can walk over it. So that will glow. That's obviously a point of interest. We move the cursor along a little bit more, and the camera will then move to the box. Obviously, the box will not be up here. The box, if I quickly scroll all the way down, will be in the acid. So again, we're going to expect to hear the splash sound play. Then if I continue over with the cursor, the camera will finally return back to the player. So there's a few things to note here. Now, we have our studio listener attached to the camera in some way, shape, or form. I think the main camera. Do we have it on the main camera? No? Which one is it? Okay, so it turns out that in a previous episode, we've actually attached the studio listener component to the audio listener game object, which is a child object of Ellen. Now that kind of makes sense. We're obviously playing as Ellen, and we want to hear things from her perspective and her point of view for most of the time. However, with these cutscenes, that kind of doesn't make sense, because as we've established, the camera is going to be moving on to other points of interest. And if there's any audio attached to those points of interest, we want to hear it from, the camera's perspective, not so much Ellen's. So I think temporarily we might go back to this depending on, what other sounds we add to the game and how they kind of affect, how they're heard and, from what point of view and stuff. I'm going to add the studio listener, which is basically our ears as the player, to the main camera. And I'm going to quickly demonstrate why. So if I quickly play the game, here in the scene tab, you'll kind of see the journey that the camera has to take whilst it takes it. So hopefully you'll get an idea of why I've attached the studio listener to the camera. So if I control Ellen, if I push this object down into this hole, which will trigger the cutscene, we will see what the camera does. It comes all the way down here. There we go, we heard the splash. Comes all the way down here to the light, then focuses on the box. Comes all the way back up to Ellen. Whilst we get attacked. So yeah, if I go back to FMOD, earlier I mentioned that I had to change the min and max distance, and that was kind of why, because obviously I had the studio listener component attached to Ellen. So as this camera, moved away from Ellen, whilst the box moved away from Ellen and came all the way down here to the acid pool, at first when it was set to its default value of, I think 20, it usually sets itself to, we couldn't hear it. We couldn't hear the splash sound because it was too far away from the studio listener. Now, like I said, that doesn't make sense. If we're following the camera, and the camera's pointing to the, main points of interest, we want to be hearing it from that perspective. So what I was doing originally, whilst the listener was attached to Ellen, was just obviously increasing the distance to 100 so that we could hear it from there. But now that we've stuck the studio listener on the camera, it makes sense to kind of leave it back at sort of 20. I'm just going to assume that this will still be heard. I'm sure it will, because the camera was quite close. But yeah, this kind of, for me, this makes more sense. Obviously, I will be willing to change this, like I said, if we, find out later on that this kind of conflicts with something else. But for now, I'm going to leave this as is. Okay, so that's just something to bear in mind. That obviously the cutscene is going to be following the camera, not our player, so we want to hear things from that perspective. And like I said, everything around the cutscene, audio-wise, is going to behave as normal. So trigger boxes, if we're triggering audio from trigger boxes, they'll be played as normal. Our player character, not that we can move it, but if we were to shoot or swing our staff whilst in a cutscene, we'd hear them as normal as well. It's only really things like the... Oh, I've lost it now. Hold on. Let's go back to the cutscene. It's only things like the camera position that changes in the cutscene. Obviously, this is all being rendered in real time. It's not like we're cutting to a video or a recording that was made in post that we're going to have to attach a sort of linear audio file to. all of our audio for the cutscenes are going to play out as normal. But it is always, I mean, in this example, it's always important to bear how they're going to be heard in the cutscene, bear those kind of things in mind. And yeah, I think with that, that's everything I wanted to talk about with the box entering the water. Now I think it's time to move on to the player hitting the water and how we kind of got that filtered sound effect. By the way, I just want to quickly point out that I'll have a link in the description, bringing you guys to a tutorial on how the FMOD guys, describe how to use the Spatializer, as well as a documentation of a Unity documentation on how to use the time since load level command a bit more better. Just thought I'd point that out there. Okay, so for the player, we're going to be using the same event, the splash sound we created earlier, but to get the sort of filtered sound effect, we want to create a snapshot. Now, I've talked about snapshots a little bit before in the past. I'll have a card in the top right corner of this video that will take you to that video, and that goes into a bit more detail on the coding side, and as well as the FMOD side, actually, how to use snapshots. But today we're just going to talk about how we can use them for the context of this video. So what we want to do is come over to Window, and we want to go to our Mixer window, and we're going to get to a page like this. And this is where we can basically create buses and kind of mix and master all the sounds for our gaming. If you'll look over here, you can see I've created a group bus called Sound Effects by right-clicking and clicking New Group here. If I open it up, you'll also see I've dragged all of our events into the bus as well. So whenever a event is played, let's go back over here. Whenever this event is played, for example, the splash sound, it will basically be passed through this bus here, which we can add. As you can see, I've already done some sort of effects with EQ here, but we can change the sound of it as well as the levels, and that goes for any other sound that passes through here as well. So if I click on the bus itself, you can see I've added an EQ. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later on. To do that, you just right-click, Add Effect, FMOD Free EQ. Nice and easy. And yeah, so snapshots is the way we're going to do it. So if we click on the snapshots tab over here, you can see I've created a snapshot called Underwater. If I click on that, you'll see that our sound effects bus has changed slightly. So the idea is whenever you trigger a snapshot, you can basically, you can preset some changes to all of your buses. And then whenever the snapshot is triggered, those effects will take place. So for example, if I quickly click off of the snapshot, oh God, how do I do that? Wait, there we go. So when we play the game, our bus is going to look like this. All of our sound effects are going to be set to 0 dB. The EQ is not going to be changed at all. These are all the default settings for it. However, when we trigger that snapshot, the high, what's the word I'm looking for? Dial is going to be dropped from 0 to -infinity. So that's going to take all of the high end out of all the sound effects passing through this bus. And we're also going to drop the bus from 0 dB to -10. And that's, like I said, whenever this snapshot is triggered, those effects are going to take place. You can basically try all that with the intensity dial here. So whenever it's at 0, the snapshot's not on. And whenever it's at 100, the snapshot is on. And what I did is I actually right-clicked it and hit Add Modulation and use the AHDSR modulator. And this is basically going to tell this snapshot to trigger over time. And as you can see here, I've got loads of different values set for that modulator. And I've also got a video talking about the AHDSR modulator in another video. So again, that'll be in the top right corner if you want to learn a bit more about that. But the idea is over 760 milliseconds, this snapshot will fade in. So it won't jump from 0 to -10 instantly. It will fade between them over less than a second. And this dial here, the EQ, will drop from 0 to -infinity over that set amount of time as well. It will then hold for 800 milliseconds, and then it will decay or return back to normal within 500 milliseconds. And what I can do is actually, I think I can play the snapshot, and you should see the bus kind of do those changes as it plays. So if I hit the spacebar, there we go. We can see a little orange dot that sort of simulates it. So let's quickly play that again. So if you follow the orange dot, it will basically fade down, stay for a bit, then fade back up. And it will do the same thing with the EQ again. When the snapshot's triggered, fade down, then fade back up, okay? And like I said, the idea, if we go back to Unity, the idea is to basically, those settings are kind of rough. Those are just the times I gave it. But that's roughly how long the player will be in the water for, or the acid, before the game then spits her back out and puts her back on land. So that's how long we want that kind of effect to take place for. Let's go back into FMOD quickly. I think that was everything I wanted to talk about with snapshots. Yeah, I think that is everything. Okay, cool. So that's everything on the FMOD side. Now, obviously, we want to trigger this FMOD snapshot to take place within our scripts. So let's go back to our water area script. And again, we're going to use the OnTriggerEnter function to do it. So what I've done is basically inside this if statement, which again, this is what we did in the last episode. We're basically checking to see if the game object has ever entered the acid or a player. Whenever the player does that, we want to basically trigger our snapshot, okay? And only if the player enters it. So if this becomes true, this if statement, we'll do all this stuff, which again, this is all set in the last episode, but we'll also do these 3 new commands here, which is what I've created. So on the first line here, you see I've created an FMOD event instance called SS, and I've also set an instance of that snapshot to be stored within it. So a little bit weird. Don't let this confuse you. Even though we're using an event instance, we are basically storing an instance of this snapshot within it, just like we would with any of our events. So now we can kind of treat it as if it were an event. We can tell it to start, stop, and etc. Do whatever we want with it. So once we've set that instance, I've then said, okay, tell SS or the snapshot to begin. So it will start. If I go back into FMOD quickly, it will start, and like I talked about earlier, this kind of modulation will take place. The time will start beginning. Imagine there was a cursor going along this sort of page here. We'd go up the attack, hold, and then decay for a little while. Then once it's finished, if I quickly go back to the script, it will release, and this instance will be destroyed. Just like it would with any normal event instance. So once it's finished going through that little path, let's quickly show you again in FMOD. Once this path is finished and decayed completely, the instance of the snapshot will be destroyed. So this is good. We can basically, even though there's only going to be 1 player at a time, whenever a player enters the water, we can basically create that effect. So it feels like, the person sitting playing the game feels like they've entered the water as well, and this sounds like they're underwater. So like I said, a really nice, easy effect. That is simple to do in both the FMOD side and the scripting side. And yeah, like I said, I might kind of change that depending on if we want to, only affect specific sound effects or music and etc. But again, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Right, and I think, yeah, okay, I think with that, we're all good for this episode. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Again, hope you guys have all enjoyed your holidays, got everything you wanted, and are, I guess, gearing back up for work. Oh no, that's no good. Well, we've still got New Year, so hopefully you will enjoy your New Year. As always, let me know what you thought of this video, if you've got any suggestions, anything you want us to see. Hopefully this was helpful, and thank you a lot, by the way, for anyone who is following along with this series. It's amazing to hear you guys say, oh yeah, I tried this in the game and it worked, I tried this and it didn't, and you helped me with this, well, I think you can do that. It's amazing that you guys are following along with this. Hopefully you will get something out of this as much as I am. But yeah, that's everything. So Scott Game Sounds, go to that if you, let's quickly jump back on. If you want to get any scripts from these videos, you can go there and do that. Thanks again for anyone who's filling out the survey. I'll have links to both a video talking about the 3D panner, which we talked about, as well as that command, the time since load level stuff. That'll all be in the link in the description. And the course, of course, the online course, that's still on its way. I'm going to be announcing some more details about that very soon, so keep an eye out on these YouTube videos and on Twitter as well, and I'll be talking more about that because I'm so excited to get out the door. So as always, I've been Henry Scott. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.